When Rosemary Kennedy was 22, her powerful father, Joseph Kennedy, forced her to undergo a lobotomy, claiming it was due to her supposed intellectual disabilities. However, new evidence has shed light on an even darker truth. As the sister of John F. Kennedy and the eldest daughter of the famous Kennedy family, Rosemary should have been considered American royalty, just like many of her siblings. Instead, she became the family's hidden secret, and her tragic fate casts a dark shadow over the legacy of the Kennedy dynasty. Born on September 13, 1918, Rosemary arrived during a time when America was deeply involved in World War I. But her family life was far removed from the chaos of the war. Her parents, Joseph and Rose Kennedy, were influential figures in politics, eagerly anticipating the arrival of their first daughter and third child. At the time of Rosemary's birth, the country was also grappling with the devastating Spanish flu epidemic, which was claiming lives at a frightening rate. This, it turned out, was more than just a bad omen. It marked the beginning of Rosemary's tragic story. Due to the overwhelming demand for doctors during the flu outbreak, no physician was available when Rosemary's mother went into labor. In a panic, the attending nurse made a fateful decision. She instructed Rose to hold her legs closed to delay the birth until the doctor arrived. The result was disastrous. Rosemary's head remained in the birth canal for over 2 hours, depriving her of much-needed oxygen. Despite this, she was brought home to her influential family, and the Kennedys likely hoped for the best. But it was clear from the beginning that this would not be a happy outcome. Coming from a family known for producing not only a president in John F. Kennedy, but also 2 senators, Robert and Ted, the Kennedys were demanding parents who expected nothing less than perfection from their children. Imagine their dismay when Rosemary struggled to meet basic childhood milestones, such as crawling by the age of 2. Desperate to maintain the family's polished image, the Kennedys made a cruel decision. Rather than seeking help for Rosemary, they tried to conceal her disability from the world. Eventually, Rose would have 9 children, and their family dinners were filled with lively conversations and the signature Kennedy quick wit. But Rosemary was noticeably different. She appeared confused by the conversations and remained unusually quiet. Her personality, far sweeter than her siblings, stood out. Her mother once remarked that Rosemary was eager to do her best, always appreciative of attention, and hopeful of deserving praise. However, another trait began to emerge that would unsettle her parents. By the time she reached her pre-teen years, it was clear that while Rosemary may not have inherited the Kennedy gift of conversation, she did inherit the family's striking upper-class Irish beauty. Over the years, the Kennedys did everything they could think of to mold Rosemary into a picture-perfect debutante. They first tried private tutors to help her learn to read and write, but when she was 15 and her beauty was beginning to blossom, her parents sent her to a convent. Although Rosemary had attended boarding schools before, her time at the Sacred Heart Convent in Rhode Island was different. Her parents ensured she was educated separately from the other students. While they likely hoped the one-on-one attention would be more beneficial to Rosemary, it also kept her struggles out of the public eye. In 1938, Rosemary Kennedy's parents pushed her into another uncomfortable situation. Her father, Joseph Kennedy, had just been appointed as the American ambassador to the United Kingdom. The family was rising fast in terms of social standing, and Joseph and Rose decided Rosemary would be introduced as a debutante to King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. This was a major event, especially for Rosemary, who still read and wrote at a 4th grade level. One of the most difficult parts for her was learning the strict rules of royal etiquette. When the time came for her to meet the king and queen, she had to perform a complicated curtsy as part of the formal introduction. Nervous and under pressure to get everything right, Rosemary nearly tripped during the event. She barely avoided falling, and the king and queen acted as if they hadn't noticed. In the following year, Rosemary joined the rest of the family in attending the coronation of Pope Pius XII in Rome. She also visited the White House. By this point, she had officially been presented to society, but that public status brought problems. Magazines wanted to feature her, but her parents were afraid any interview might reveal her disabilities. While they did allow a few controlled interviews, they carefully managed what the public was told. They made up stories about Rosemary training to be a kindergarten teacher and having dreams of performing on stage, none of which were true. To the outside world, Rosemary seemed to be doing well. But after returning from her debut in England, something changed. According to her sister Eunice, Rosemary's mental and emotional state declined suddenly when she was 22. That's when the serious problems began. Rosemary started having seizures, or episodes that looked like seizures, and her personality also changed. She became easily upset and even violent at times, sometimes lashing out at family members. Her parents, desperate to protect the family's public image, tried to manage the situation like they had before. They sent her to a summer camp in Massachusetts, hoping things would settle down. That didn't work. She was expelled. They then placed her in a Philadelphia boarding school, but she didn't last long there either. As a last attempt, they sent her to another convent school, similar to where she'd spent part of her youth. But this time, things were different. Rosemary was now an adult. She had experienced more freedom and wasn't willing to give that up. Trouble started right away. Instead of staying at the convent and following the rules, Rosemary began sneaking out at night. The nuns were alarmed, and so were her parents. They suspected she was meeting men during these outings, though no one could prove exactly what she was doing. Everyone feared the possibility of her getting pregnant. While Rosemary was clearly struggling, her father's main concern was his reputation. Joseph Kennedy worried that she would bring shame to the family and damage the political chances of her brothers and the social status of her sisters. That fear led him to make a devastating decision. At the time, mental illness wasn't well understood, and a new procedure was gaining attention: the lobotomy. The goal of the operation was to calm people who showed aggressive or unstable behavior by cutting connections in the brain's frontal lobe. Joseph Kennedy believed this could solve the problem, and chose to go through with it. In November 1941, when Rosemary was 23, she underwent a lobotomy performed by Dr. James Watts and Dr. Walter Freeman. The procedure details are chilling. As they worked, they had Rosemary recite the Lord's Prayer, sing God Bless America, or count backwards to determine how far they needed to cut. They stopped only when she became nonsensical. Once the procedure was completed, they sent her home to recover. It didn't take long for the family to realize something had gone horribly wrong. Rosemary had slipped into a state of confusion, suffering from occasional, unpredictable bursts of anger. Over time, it became clear that instead of improving, she was deteriorating. The doctors had gone too far, leaving her barely able to speak, and her mental capacity had diminished to that of a toddler, erasing years of effort and growth in one swift action. Yet, the nightmare did not end there. Rosemary's decline didn't stop with her inability to speak coherently, nor did it end with her mental regression. At this point, the eldest Kennedy daughter could no longer walk, and also became incontinent. It was truly a living nightmare. Joseph Kennedy, as noted by biographer Lawrence Leamer, was the one behind Rosemary's lobotomy. He believed in fixing problems quickly and moving on. In fact, he didn't inform his wife, Rose, about his plans for the lobotomy until after it was completed. After the procedure, Joseph only made things worse with the visible consequences of the botched lobotomy every time they looked at Rosemary. The Kennedys did what they did best. They pretended, hiding Rosemary away in an institution as soon as possible, first in New York and then in Wisconsin at the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children. There, the Kennedys went to great lengths to isolate her from public view, even building her a private residence, which locals called the Kennedy Cottage. Rosemary led a life entirely separate from her family at St. Coletta, with simple and minimal pleasures. 2 nuns took care of most of her needs, as she could no longer manage independently. Occasionally, they allowed her to go for a drive, walk a dog, or do pottery under supervision. It might sound peaceful, but it wasn't. During this time, there were few records of Rosemary's parents visiting her at St. Coletta. Rose Kennedy didn't visit her daughter for over 20 years, and most of her siblings were unaware of her condition. This lonely existence continued for decades until it reached a breaking point. In 1961, Joseph Kennedy finally achieved everything he had dreamed of when his son, John F. Kennedy, became president. Feeling the coast was clear, it was only then that the patriarch publicly acknowledged that his daughter Rosemary had been institutionalized for mental health reasons. However, he conveniently left out a crucial detail. Joseph had spent most of his life concealing anything less than perfect. So even his confessions were incomplete. While he admitted that Rosemary was in an institution, he completely omitted the fact that he had given her a lobotomy, the procedure that had all but destroyed her life. In late 1961, fate caught up with Rosemary's father. Joseph Kennedy suffered a massive stroke, the same year his son, John F. Kennedy, became president. Like Rosemary, his mental faculties were significantly impaired, and he struggled with walking. It was at this time that he finally revealed to his other children where Rosemary was living. However, it took yet another tragedy for them to finally visit her. Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, passed away in 1969, living through his son John's assassination. It was only after his death that the remaining Kennedy children began to visit Rosemary at St. Coletta. Even though her family treated her terribly, Rosemary remained strong and went through a significant change over the years. She worked very hard to relearn how to walk, even though she still moved with a limp. And although her speech did not fully return, she found other ways to communicate. Disquieting rumors have accompanied the story of Rosemary Kennedy, largely because the Kennedys kept details about her very private. Experts continue to find it difficult to determine the exact nature of her mental abilities and impairments. In fact, some argue that Rosemary was not mentally impaired. One interpretation of her life suggests that she dealt with mental illness, likely depression, rather than a developmental disability. Sadly, to her ambitious parents, it made no difference. Even one of the doctors who carried out Rosemary's lobotomy, James Watts, later admitted that he did not believe she was mentally impaired. Watts himself supported the view that she merely experienced depression. Before her lobotomy, Rosemary kept extensive diaries, and her memories point to a fairly ordinary life filled with social gatherings in high society just 1 year before the operation. In fact, she wrote to her father, "Darling Daddy, I'm so fond of you, and I love you so much." Although these messages do not conclusively reflect her mental abilities, they do not suggest that she was prone to violent behavior. It could be that Rosemary's greatest fault, in the eyes of her family, was merely her difference from the rest of her driven relatives. Ultimately, her secrets almost stayed buried with those of the Kennedy family. Joseph Kennedy had concealed his eldest daughter's struggles so thoroughly that the reality of her lobotomy was not revealed until almost 20 years after his death. Nevertheless, there is one positive outcome from Rosemary's experiences. During the 1960s, her sister Eunice Kennedy Shriver established the Special Olympics. Although Shriver mentioned that the stories of many individuals motivated her to begin the Games, Rosemary represented the type of person she hoped to see more involved in sports. Ultimately, Rosemary endured a harsher version of what some consider the Kennedy curse than her relatives, yet she managed to live longer than many of them. Notoriously, her two oldest brothers, Joseph Jr. and John Kennedy, met violent ends, as did her younger sister Kathleen and her younger brother Bobby. Meanwhile, Rosemary continued her modest, quiet life until 2005, when she passed away due to natural causes at the age of 86, surrounded by her remaining siblings, Jean, Eunice, Patricia, and Ted. Following the public revelation of Rosemary's condition, the Kennedy family maintained a tight grip on the details of her life, keeping her hidden from most public events and limiting any contact with relatives. In the years after her father's death, growing awareness of mental health issues stirred conversations in society about how individuals with disabilities should be treated. As the truth about the lobotomy slowly came to light, scholars and journalists began to re-examine the treatment she received and the decisions made by her family. During the 1960s and 1970s, there were few opportunities to discuss Rosemary's story openly. The institution where she resided became one of the few channels through which any information emerged. Visits by a handful of relatives were rare, and the details shared were cautious and highly controlled. In spite of her isolation, Rosemary continued to receive some basic care. Her day-to-day existence involved structured routines provided by the staff of the care facility, with very limited social interaction outside the controlled environment. Although she often remained quiet and withdrawn, small signs of progress could be noticed by those who spent time with her. She started to follow familiar routines, and in moments of calm, she would offer simple responses to those who cared for her. As public opinion began to shift regarding mental health treatments, Rosemary's situation sparked questions about the methods used on patients during that time. Researchers turned their attention to the lasting impacts of the procedures performed in the mid-20th century. While some experts argued that more could have been done to help her recover some measure of function, others saw her case as a representation of a widespread practice that affected many individuals in similar circumstances. These studies shed new light on the use of lobotomies and contributed to the gradual abandonment of the procedure in favor of more carefully considered approaches to mental health care. Within the Kennedy family itself, the rediscovery of Rosemary's story led to painful reflections. Close relatives and family friends began to question past decisions made in the interest of protecting public image. In confidential interviews with biographers and historians, members of the extended family expressed regret over the secrecy and the extreme measures taken during Rosemary's early adulthood. Some recalled moments when they wished they had been allowed to offer meaningful support, rather than having her life controlled in the name of preserving a pristine reputation. Over time, the family's narrative shifted from one of silence to an acknowledgement that mistakes had been made, and that those mistakes had cost Rosemary dearly. In the decades that followed, voices within the mental health community called for a re-examination of how people with cognitive impairments were treated. The case of Rosemary Kennedy became a reference point in discussions about patient rights and the ethics of making medical decisions without consent. The lessons learned from her life contributed to new policies in healthcare institutions, ensuring that vulnerable individuals were given more respect and a voice in their treatment. Although the changes came too late to repair much of the damage done to Rosemary herself, they set a new course for the future of care for those living with disabilities. Within the broader context of American history, Rosemary's story remains a somber reminder of the cost of prioritizing image over compassion. The quiet, enduring life she led within the walls of a small institutional facility stands in contrast to the public lives of her siblings, whose careers and personal achievements have been widely celebrated. As more details emerged through declassified documents and candid family interviews, historians began to piece together not only the personal hardships faced by Rosemary, but also the cultural forces that had shaped the decisions of a prominent family during a challenging era. The narrative of her life invites ongoing reflection on both the price of secrecy and the importance of compassionate mental health care. Even as debates continue over the ethics of past treatments, Rosemary Kennedy's memory serves to remind us that every individual deserves dignity and thoughtful care. Her quiet resilience, despite years of neglect and isolation, has become a part of the ongoing conversation about how society must learn from its past. In remembering her, modern advocates for mental health reform find inspiration to push for better care practices that respect the individuality and worth of every person. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.